Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. This is special live coverage and analysis of the Menendez brothers hearing. And isn't it ironic? Because now I am hearing that there will not be cameras in the courtroom, which I was sure that there were. But they are going to be appearing. The brothers will be via Zoom. Obviously, for those who have been living under a rock, the Menendez brothers have been in prison for the better part of 35 years, murdering both their parents in 1989. But they claim it was out of self-defense because they were being SA'd by the father, and the mother was turning a blind eye to it all. Today's hearing, Josh Ritter, you're coming to us from Los Angeles. I understand that you understand there's no cameras actually allowed inside the courtroom, which I'm surprised by. This is happening at a Los Angeles County Superior Court in Van Nuys. Do we know why? Because typically cameras are allowed in. Josh, do we have any idea why they're not today?
The judge did not give a reason for it. I agree with you. Usually they are allowed in the courtroom, especially for something like this, where everybody seems to be really interested in following it, to the point that there was a lottery system to even allow spectators into the courtroom. I think there was something like only 16 spots available, and a crowd of people outside conducted a lottery earlier today to see who would be able to go inside, but they're going to be the only ones who are going to be able to see these two gentlemen after 30 years, and they're only going to be able to see them remotely. Yeah,
via Zoom. So, hey, Space, can I bring this up, or are you still tweaking it? But whenever you're ready, bring up the live feed. So there's a, it looks calm right now, but this is outside the Van Nuys courthouse, and obviously we're expecting, one or two or more, impromptu press conferences once this is over. It was a mad scram today because they were giving out court passes basically by lottery system, and there was a photo of everyone just going crazy trying to get their lottery ticket to get in there, I guess, to be able to report about it. But Professor Joe Patuto is with us today. This has to do with this habeas corpus petition that was signed, a petition to the court, I guess, over a year ago about new evidence in this case. Before we even get to that, can you just explain what this habeas corpus is and sort of what you're expecting out of today's hearing?
Yeah, well, habeas corpus is known as a great writ, and it was used historically to achieve a hearing for someone who had been held unconstitutionally. And the Latin means, I think it means bring or take the body, have the body. And so what it's used for is it's not a direct appeal. It's somebody who's been convicted, who's in jail or prison, and there's a challenge, a civil challenge made to the constitutionality or the legality of the holding of the person. This one confuses me, and Josh, who knows California law better than I do, may be able to explain it, because this case is not a case in which they're claiming they didn't do the crime, that the legality of the imprisonment. They're claiming, as I understand it, that they should be released because of mitigating factors that were not considered at the time. And that's an unusual use of habeas corpus in the federal system. This could not go on a habeas corpus petition. But Josh, maybe California has a different version of when you can use this way to challenge imprisonment.
This is why I love when you have me on with Professor Joe, because she always explains things so well, better than I do. But you're absolutely right. The one of the mechanisms by which you can have a habeas is, first of all, you have to have exhausted all of your other appellate remedies, which they've arrived at. So this is their last legal avenue to try to get out. And one of the reasons you can bring this is if there's new evidence. The evidence is not that they didn't do it. The evidence is that there were things that should have been considered and therefore allowed them to argue imperfect self-defense, which they were not given the opportunity to do at the second trial, and perhaps even have had the opportunity to argue for a voluntary manslaughter, which was not available to the jury at the second trial. So it's this idea, and I suppose what it's ultimately asking for in relief is for a new trial to be given to them. I don't think they're asking for the conviction to be overturned, but then throw into the whole mix, they've on a completely separate avenue gone straight to the DA, Mr. Gascon, and asked to sentence them, further complicated by the idea that he is no longer going to be the DA in about a couple of weeks here because he lost to Nathan Hochman, who will take control of the DA's office at the beginning of December. And that hearing on the resentencing isn't supposed to take place until the first week of December. So there's a lot of spinning plates in this whole thing, but all of them seem to be moving towards some sort of release of these two men after 30 years.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know what would be more of a surprise, someone who has not heard of the Menendez brothers or someone who's not heard of Courtroom Confidential, which is Josh Ritter's brand new podcast. So make sure you're checking out Josh on Courtroom Confidential. I am following a person who we were going to have on the show at one point. This is Joan Vandermolen on the right there. That is Kitty Menendez, the mother's sister, who has been sticking up and supporting the Menendez brothers. That you see her on the right. And then on the left is the madness prior to this lottery hearing. Again, I am assuming that we're going to get a news conference of some sort or multiple after this out on the steps of the courthouse. But if you ever been to a concert where they take your phones and they put in those little bags that they give you, that's what's going on inside the Van Nuys courthouse today. I'm following somebody that has made a documentary on the Menendez brothers, and he's tweeting out that they were forced to give up their phones, and there is, like those little lock bags. So they're not even allowed to have a cell phone in there. Josh, again, this is interesting. We'll get to the new potential evidence in a minute, but this is interesting. I mean, I don't know. The law is supposed to be like equitable for everybody, but these are the Menendez brothers. So now no cameras. You've got to have your phone in a little lockbox. I mean, what's going on? What is the point of all this? I mean, obviously it's super high profile, but are they getting preferential treatment here?
We see this sometimes in these high profile cases. It's like everybody loses their mind and they start to treat it very differently than they would any other case. And it's unfortunate because, it is a case that has a lot of public interest, and you would hope that we could get some coverage of it that's not going to be, secondhand people rushing outside to tweet about it. One thing if I could add too, when you showed the picture of the aunt, she is 93 years old and traveled here for this hearing. And what I heard this morning is that Mark Garagos, who is representing the brothers, is going to ask the judge to have that aunt testify today because she is advanced in age. They're worried about whether or not she'll be available to testify later on if they need to have her testify at a hearing. So they may actually take testimony from her today just so that they have that on the record for an eventual decision, which it doesn't sound like the decision is forthcoming this morning.
Could I interject there? That's interesting for a couple of reasons, but the big one is there's no adversary on the other side to cross-examine her. The current prosecutor supports the release or the resentencing that they get out. So it seems to me that to the extent that the new DA wants to contest this, it seems to me that it's unfair to the city, to the prosecution, to be able to take testimony that way when there's no one on the other side to challenge the information that's being provided.
Yeah,
Yeah,
although I do think, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the original prosecutors and other prosecutors who are against his release are there. I don't know if that means that they're actually going to be speaking, but this is who Josh was just talking about. That's Joan Vandermolen, again, Kitty Menendez, the mother's sister, the Menendez brothers' mother's sister, otherwise known as their aunt. 93 years old, as you heard Josh say, and she's been out here a couple times. But Josh, are there going to be, and this is back to a live look at what's going on here outside the courthouse. You just don't see the 10 million cameras behind this one. But Josh, what about that? I mean, are prosecutors, original prosecutors and or current prosecutors going to have a say in this?
They're not going to have a say in it as acting as deputies of the current prosecutor. I mean, the position taken by the current prosecutor is that he's in favor of this resentencing. The new prosecutor, Nathan Hochman, has said that he needs time to review the case himself before he weighs in on it. But Professor Joe makes an excellent point too, as far as, is there anyone in opposition to this? And I know of at least one amicus brief that was filed by a family member. I believe it was a brother of Jose Menendez, who is adamantly against this, has hired representation, has made a filing in opposition to any resentencing. So that is a very good point. This isn't just something that's going to get bulldozed through. The judge is going to have to hear from both sides. There may be a lot of support from the victim's family on one side, but that doesn't mean that they are not given an opportunity to hear people who are opposed to it.
Josh, while I have you, there was some news that broke, I think, over the weekend or just before the weekend, that Lyle Menendez is now separated from his wife, a woman named Rebecca Sneed, after 21 years of marriage. That seems like some interesting timing. Any I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but any idea as to why he'd be separating from his spouse on the basically what could be the eve of his release from prison?
I have no idea. I'm sitting here trying to think if there's any strategic reason why they might do it. I guess it just shows you that maybe marriages are difficult even 20 years later, even with one person in custody.
Even when you're locked up, it's hard.
Yeah. If I can interject, there's a story circulating. It's actually the wife who's asked for separation, Rebecca Sneed. And there's a story circulating that he has cheated on the marriage with a college student, which I find incredible, because as I understand it, they do not have conjugal visits because even though California now allows them, they killed a family member and there's some sort of exception for it. At least that's what all the news agencies are saying. So the idea that you can cheat just seems to me to be odd, but that's the story that's circulating. Can't stand behind it as whether it's accurate.
Yeah, this is true. There are unconfirmed reports, and I think she's like 21, 22 years old. I've seen the pictures. It looks like she visited him in prison, COE. I don't know if you can get that and bring that up. Joe Petito, how come I could barely get a woman when I was a free man? Still am a free man, but these guys are behind bars and like they can't keep track of the women that they're getting.
I cannot speak and would not speak for women who find men who are in prison for first-degree premeditated planned murder are somehow attractive and eligible candidates for a relationship.
Yeah,
I mean, look at say it more strongly without getting into trouble on this program.
Yeah. By the way, we in theory are about 17 minutes into this hearing. If you're joining late, cameras were forbidden from being inside, but there's a huge media presence outside, and we're expecting as soon as this is over for there to be a press conference. Lyle's on his second marriage. I mean, Josh Ritter, people here know I had to walk the COE's dog for 6 months just to try to get a date. These guys do nothing, and they are getting swarmed by women. I just do not understand it. I mean, they're good-looking dudes who are fit, I guess. They're good tennis players. What could you do? So, Ritter, back to you on this. the court today is supposedly reassessing this new evidence, and there are two major pieces. One is a letter that Erik wrote to his now deceased cousin, a guy named Andy Cano. Basically, this was prior to the murders, I believe, just a few weeks before, talking about he couldn't take the SA anymore from his father or his mother turning the blind eye. How do they weigh this evidence now, 35 plus years later? How does a judge look at this?
So in the first trial, they were allowed to put on a lot of evidence about the abuse. They put on dozens and dozens of witnesses, I mean the defense, to support the idea that these two brothers were victims at the hands of their father of systematic abuse for years. By the time the second trial rolled around, the judge did a near 180 on all of that and kept out the lion's share of all of that, to the point that the prosecutor in the second trial argued that there was no corroborating evidence of any kind of abuse, that the abuse never took place, it was fabricated, and there's nothing to support that. This new evidence, they're saying, undercuts that prosecution argument, that this letter is purportedly written 8 months before the murders took place. That letter, in conjunction with the affidavit from the member of the Menudo band, they're saying, look, this is corroborating evidence. This does support the idea that abuse was taking place. And therefore, it was an error to allow the prosecution to make those arguments in the second trial. And therefore, they should have been given the opportunity to present more of this evidence, to have an imperfect self-defense instruction, and to have voluntary manslaughter available to the jurors. It's I'm not going to say it's a absolute rock solid going to win the day type of argument, but I think it should give a judge pause. If there was existing evidence and the prosecution said it didn't exist, that simply isn't the universe. So we'll see what the judge decides. But I really think, sorry to carry on about all of this, but I really think the strongest argument toward their release is simply the DA, if Hochman goes along with it, saying we want them resentenced. We're not asking to undo the trial. We're not asking for a retrial. We're not asking to overturn their convictions. We're asking simply to have the special circumstances dismissed, meaning going from a life without parole murder to a murder where they would be eligible parole, making them immediately eligible for parole.
Yeah, if I can add to that,
Please.
I saw a report of at least one of the prosecutors who is challenging whether that letter is authentic. There has been no vetting of the letter, apparently. I watched a lot of this original trial. It was on Court TV. And at the first trial, I didn't see the second trial, the first trial, which ended up in the hung juries. And I don't remember that letter coming in the first trial. Now, maybe it did, and my memory is just bad, which is certainly possible, but I don't remember anything like that coming out in the first trial.
Well, what they're saying is that this letter was discovered since that time.
Yeah.
Well, but wouldn't he know he wrote the letter?
That's a great point. That's a great point. You're right. Either he forgot that he wrote the letter
8 months before.
Right.
And the cousin didn't come forward with it in a family that was supportive of him. It may be that the letter is authentic. It may be that it was written. It may be that it was discovered later. All those things may be true, but it seems to me there's at least some reason to question it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. By the way, theoretically, and we know court can run late, but we're about 21 minutes into this hearing. If you're joining us late, there's no cameras allowed in the Van Nuys West Courthouse, which is part of the Superior Court of County of Los Angeles. Phantom 6000 is our friend in LA who is an attorney. It says Nathan Hochman takes over December 2nd. That's literally next week. He will slow roll this. I thought that the letter was undated and the cousin testified during the trial. I think Andy Cano did testify. I'm not sure if it was both trials or the initial trial. I'm not 100% sure about that. The letter was discovered circa 2003 after Andy Cano's death. But I mean, the professor brings up a good point. Wouldn't Erik have known that he in fact sent it? Josh Ritter, back to you. How long can a hearing like this go on for? Because that means we all have to talk for a while until they would come out. How long can it go on for, you think?
As of just a few minutes ago, I thought it would be a very short hearing because I thought it was just going to be kind of them scheduling things, that they want to kind of make sure that the new DA had an opportunity to review the case because they don't want there being some dramatic shift in the DA's position while this is going on, and that they were just going to be picking new dates. But now hearing that there may be possible testimony from, the aunt, I don't know. It could take much longer than that. But my understanding is that this morning, no one should be expecting any decision being made as far as the brothers and either certainly the habeas petition, but even on the resentencing issue.
Yeah, I mean, people were putting it like a less than 5% chance that they would basically be freed today. Not likely. And you just heard Phantom 6000 say this new guy Hochman is taking control of the DA's office next week, December 2nd. Joe Patuto, I mean, to you on the same kind of question I asked Josh earlier, it does seem like, there's they're going, to great lengths here. I don't know if it's to assuage the Menendez brothers or just keep things kosher from a legal standpoint. But I mean, we don't see phones being taken away. We don't see cameras being stripped out of the Los Angeles County courtrooms typically. So why do it now for what in theory should just be another hearing?
Yeah, I don't understand it. It seems to me from the perspective of the judge, letting the public in to hear it and hear it accurately through cameras would be something that would be in the interest of both the judge in conducting the hearing and in the interest of justice, and to manage what the public perceptions may be, particularly in light of the documentary and the public support that's out there. So I don't understand it at all. Unless there's something that he's planning to do in there that nobody expects, but then it seems to me he would be better off having it in public also, so that he could explain it on the record. I have no explanation for it. I don't see any reason why, particularly in a case when they only have 16 places for the public to come in and sit and watch, that they wouldn't put the cameras in a courtroom that I assume is set up for cameras, because they do televised hearings or streamed hearings. So it's set up for it. They don't seem to have, they wouldn't have any logistic argument for not doing it.
By the way, Super Planner Girl, this was an incredibly tragic twist last night. We're doing this at 5 p.m. Eastern today. Hannah Kobayashi is a young woman from Maui, Hawaii, who was supposed to head to New York City, lands at LAX, and has vanished. And then in a horrific twist, her father, who was here searching for her, I guess the pain was too much. He unalived himself outside of LAX yesterday. Very bizarre story. I don't think anyone's exactly sure about what's happening, but we are bringing on some interesting people at 5 o'clock today to discuss that case. Josh, how much play is that getting in LA right now? It's got to be quite a bit, right?
Yeah, it's getting a lot of coverage. It started out kind of mysterious, then it turned very scary when days are going by and they can't seem to locate her, and we're getting news that she may have been the victim of some sort of identity theft, and she's sending these very troubling text messages to her family members. And now with the news of her father, it just has taken another even more tragic turn. We're all praying, obviously, that she's located, but it just to add to the tragedy that family has had to experience.
Yeah, wow, it was crazy. When I read that, I had to read it like 3 or 4 different times to make sure. It was nuts. But back to this, the Menendez brothers again, in theory, almost 27 minutes into their hearing, which started at 10:30 Pacific time, 1:30 Eastern time. I have no idea what time in New Zealand, but tomorrow in New Zealand. And so we were talking about this letter that Erik, allegedly wrote to his cousin, Andy Cano. But there's another piece of evidence, Joe Patuto, and that is this guy, Roy Rossello. He's a former member of the band Menudo. And in this documentary that was about Menudo and the Menendez brothers, he talked about some severe abuse he received, this member of Menudo, at the hands of Jose Menendez, who, as many people know, was a music executive. So these are the two big things, the Andy Cano letter and then Roy Rossello of Menudo. I have no idea. Do either of you know if Roy Rossello is here for this by any chance? Does anyone know?
I feel like we would have heard that, and I haven't heard anything about it.
Right. Yeah, interesting. But so Joe, what about this Roy Rossello guy who's a member of the big boy band Menudo? What are they going to do? How are they going to dissect that piece of evidence?
Well, if it's another similar act, if they have another trial, presumably that would be admissible, or at least arguably admissible. But what interests or troubles me about all this is assuming that there was abuse. There has to be, look at the Sarah Boone trial. There has to be a reasonable apprehension of immediate serious harm to justify the use of deadly force. And I remember that first trial. The mother and the father, Kitty and what's the father's name?
Jose.
And Jose were sitting on the couch watching TV. The brothers came in with loaded guns. They were eating ice cream and shot both of them. The mother was still moving around on the couch. So one of them went back out, reloaded, came back in, and shot her a number of times. So number one, if you think of Sarah Boone with her significant other in that suitcase, and the claim is she's not in reasonable apprehension of immediate danger, I don't say you can make the argument that either of the Menendez brothers were in immediate apprehension of harm from the father. And there's no claim that the mother ever put them in danger, or that they were afraid that the mother would injure them or seriously injure them or kill them, which is what they were saying. So even if you want to take it to the extreme, there was the serious abuse, there was a reasonable apprehension of immediate serious injury from the father. They not only killed the mother, but I remember the testimony vividly, went back out, reloaded, and came back in and shot her. I don't see how there's any possibility of making that claim with the mother. I mean, it would be like in Sarah Boone's case, having her significant other and somebody else in the suitcase, and you decided she was in reasonable apprehension of harm from him, so she was entitled to let the second person in the suitcase die too.
Yeah, hop in, Josh.
Well, I was going to say, once again, you've nailed it, Professor. That is the reason why the judge kept most of that evidence out for the second trial. He just felt that there was no nexus between the abuse and their actions that day. There was no showing of immediacy as far as their fear. They were arguing that they were in fear that they were going to lose their lives, and therefore they were acting in self-defense. And the judge said, listen, after reconsidering this, having seen the first trial, I don't think that there's enough immediate evidence of the immediacy for them to take action. So kept, like I said, the vast majority of that abuse evidence out in the second trial.
Joe Patuto, like we've got in this chat right now, it seems like half the people saying free the Menendez brothers, and the other half saying that their killers belong in prison where they are. Why do you think this is such a divisive case for the American public? Why do half the people, it appears, think that they should be released and the other half say no way?
Well, I'm going to have to guess, obviously, because I don't think I can speak for one half of the American public or the other half of the American public. But in part, I mean, the sentence is an extremely long sentence. I mean, they've been in prison for 1990, I think, is when they were first arrested, and this is, so it's 34 years. It's a long time. Many states in this country would not have been sentenced that long, even for first-degree murder. I know the claim is that they've been model citizens while they've been in prison. So that's part of it, I assume. And then the other part is you get a Netflix, you get a documentary, you get people who provide the case for release. And I have not seen that documentary. It may have been extraordinarily even-handed, but it may have leaned towards the case for release from the brothers. And in addition, this case was, the publicity when it was tried the first and second times was enormous, and there was a lot of sympathy for the brothers even then.
Just looking at some reports here that obviously the hearing has started. Should be about 33 minutes in if they started on time. Hadjichoini can judge free them today. Newsom said he was not getting, and Josh, I'll have you explain this because you understand it way better than me. Newsom was not going to get involved in the issue of clemency. He doesn't really have, at least not now, but he doesn't really have any say in this. This is up to these Superior Court judges, at least at this point, right, Josh?
Yeah, it was funny how Newsom got involved because originally this was a decision made by George Gascon that he was going to move the court to resentence them. And then after making that press conference saying that's what they intended to do, and I think even getting a court date, then he independently wrote a letter to the governor asking for clemency. And I don't know, no one's really explained why that was done or why he felt that was necessary. There was a lot of speculation that there was an election going on. Perhaps that was why he wanted to continue to get himself in the news. But Newsom, the governor, then came out and said that he's kind of going to sit on the sidelines to see, at least give the new DA an opportunity to weigh in on all of this before he makes any kind of decision.
Yeah. Josh, just to get back to Joe's point, though, this is like I think if the mother was not targeted, I don't think there's any way these boys, now men, even back then, I'll get yelled at because they were of legal age when this happened. But if you factored Kitty out of this equation, I don't think there's any doubt that these guys would be released now. But that is like the X factor, why murder the mom? But they, according to all the reports and indications that I've looked at, it's because she was turning a blind eye, and some allege that she was even participating.
Well, let me add to that. I remember this testimony from the trial. I think one of the brothers said, she was really very tied to Jose, and they felt she couldn't really survive well without him. So in a sense, it was being merciful to her. Now, I added that part, but I'm virtually certain that was testimony at the trial.
That's interesting.
But excuse me.
No, not at all. Shout out to Sanaz Taharian coming to us from New Zealand. Love having you here. Appreciate you being part of the best community in all of the YouTubes. But Josh, the mother, Kitty, is difficult to explain away, but then you've got this Joan Vandermolen, who's her sister, right? So maybe she knows something we don't all know.
No, you're absolutely right. Whenever and I think that's why we're still discussing this case 30 years later, because you can talk about it for quite a bit. There's a lot of different angles and different sides to this story. And that whenever you start to really make an argument for how they were suffering from abuse and really felt trapped and had no alternative and felt like they had to do this horrible, horrible thing, then you get asked the question, well, what about the mom? And that kind of brings that argument almost to a screeching halt, because it really is not explained, even in their own theory, as to why they did this. I think that, the family is obviously in support of this. If it wasn't for, and not all the family, by the way, there is one brother of Jose who's adamantly against any kind of resentencing or release, but the vast majority of the family is in favor of this. If it wasn't for that, I don't think we would be talking about it, and I don't think it would be in court here today. But I think that the other point is what you kind of alluded to, was that, we're now 30 years later and culturally very different in the way that we treat allegations of abuse. I mean, it's, I remember this trial taking place too. And I also remember that late night talk shows and Saturday Night Live out and out mocked these two men for claiming that they were abused. They were ridiculed for crying in court during their testimony. Believe them or not, it's hard to imagine in this day and age, people making allegations of being the victims of this kind of abuse would be ridiculed that kind of way. And the point I'm trying to make is that's just kind of how the culture was 30 years ago. It's changed, obviously, to today, that I think people are more receptive to the idea that maybe this was a much more complex case than and people really viewed it back then.
I'm just looking at some stuff here, looking at some notes. But Professor, this is a professor question. What is the difference between clemency and a pardon? Either of those, I guess, are possibilities. More than likely would be a resentencing or a vacating of the sentence.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I can answer that. Clemency, as the word suggests, doesn't deny that the crime was committed. It says we're going to exercise mercy in this situation. I'm not sure whether technically pardon gives you the same. It doesn't go to the underlying crime. Maybe it's a little different there. But in each case, it's a decision from the executive branch. Either the governor or sometimes the state has a committee of the attorney general and the secretary of the state and the governor. And it's independent of the judicial system where the decision is made.
By the way, Amanda here, but we've had Dr. Burgess on about this. She testified at Erik Menendez's trial and believes that they should be freed. She firmly believes that these allegations of abuse were true. The brothers both cried real tears. That's something I rarely see defendants do. Yeah, I mean, they were broken up. There's no question about it. So there's some possible outcomes from this hearing today. Josh, one of them is just a resentencing consideration. What does that mean? Like, what could a judge do here in terms of just resentencing them?
Well, if I'm being honest, what I believe is going to happen today is not a whole bunch. I think they're probably going to pick a later date to really make some heavy decisions on this. But to your question, the resentencing, what they're asking to do, the Gascon has not asked that they be resentenced on murder. They were sentenced on murder with special circumstance, which meant that they were not eligible for parole. One of the special circumstances were lying in wait, and the other one was for financial gain. The Gascon is asking that the judge strike those and dismiss those special circumstances, which would change it from a death penalty eligible murder into a more garden variety murder where they would serve 25 years to life. If that were to happen because of their age, to add another wrinkle into this whole thing, they would then become immediately eligible for parole. Then it would have to go before a parole board. And when that could take place is anyone's guess. And whether or not the parole board decides to parole them at the first opportunity is also anyone's guess. So even if they are granted this resentencing, I don't expect this to move at breakneck speed to have them released. People are talking about Thanksgiving, Christmas, or end of the year. I think it may take a little bit longer.
By the way, back to Phantom, who's got his pulse on LA County there. I think when Van Nuys made a judge change, Garagos and Gascon, the DA till next week, panicked and went to Newsom for clemency. Newsom jockeying for presidential bid. Doesn't want to grab the hot potato. There you go. He doesn't want to. Politics. The other thing here, if there's a possibility of a resentencing. There is a very slim possibility of an immediate release. Joe Patuto, what do you think the chances of that are? Probably next to zero, I would say.
I would think so, although I'm not familiar enough with California law or politics. But it does seem to me that you've got a new DA coming in who was elected. the DA who was there is outgoing, I think it would be not impossible, but difficult, pretty difficult for a judge in the face of that, and the governor at least signaling that he wants to wait with regard to what he does, for a judge to enter and to do something that would be an immediate release. I think it's much more likely, if it's going to be anything, that it would be a decision that would run to what the sentence should be and allow them to be eligible for parole.
Can I? What?
Yeah,
And I don't
one
think,
other thing that
I'm trying to think, Josh, you can tell me this. I'm not even sure in a habeas, but I don't know California habeas corpus, whether the judge can simply say you're released, period, because typically it's you're released and then it's up to the DA to decide whether to retry. They may decide not to because of all the time that's gone by, but I don't see that the judge, unless California has a very odd version of habeas corpus, that the judge would have that authority anyway.
No, I think the relief, if they were granted the habeas, which is, I think, a slim chance, would just be to say that, hey, you need to retry them if you choose to.
Right.
But what I was going to say, too, is, I mean, another thing to keep in mind is a judge still has to decide on this. A judge may hear all of this and say, I'm not going with it. These people were sentenced to life without parole. They committed 2 brutal murders. A jury has spoken. A verdict was recorded. And I don't see any reason why to change all of that just because you guys are saying that you've changed your minds and the world has changed since that time. I don't know if a judge will do that. I'm just saying that let's not forget that one crucial part in all of this is a judge has to go along with everything.
Well, and presumably, this I don't remember, they must have appealed the original convictions on the basis that this evidence was excluded from that second trial.
They did, and
it isn't as though it
denied.
hasn't been. Yeah, that's right. It isn't as though it hasn't been reviewed by a judge at least once.
Hey, Josh, people are asking, if not today, maybe the next court hearing. Let's say that they are resentenced to time served and they're released. What kind of release conditions are put on, prisoners who have spent this kind of time for this kind of crime? What would they be allowed or not allowed to do?
Well, if they are resentenced in the way that Gascon is asking for, they would just be eligible for parole, not immediate release. If they're then granted parole by the parole board, they would be under the same conditions that any parolee is. They have a officer they have to check in with. They're supervised. They don't enjoy, just absolute freedom. They would be kind of under some pretty strict supervision, at least for a period of time while their parole lasts.
Joe Patuto, to you. I mean, Josh mentioned the Netflix documentary. There's multiple ones out. I mean, these guys have been all over the news for the 35 years that they've been behind bars. There's been ups and downs in terms of publicity, but what about the fact that a Netflix documentary can sort of create enough of a factor that now the courts are literally weighing the issue? I don't want to say it's directly because of the documentary, but it has something to do with it, no doubt.
Yeah, well, I think the Netflix documentary generated support and questions about what happened at the original trial. And that kind of public support helps. It's not directly related to what a judge would do in a hearing, but it does help when one is trying to make the case that the judge should do something. And it certainly helps with an elected prosecutor, and it certainly helps with an elected governor, although they've got the calculus of, whether the support is more than the non-support. I don't know. I've got a couple of views about that ultimate question, Joe. On the one hand, I think people have their First Amendment right to do a documentary, to take a particular position on things, to hope to persuade by what they produce. I have no question about it. But I do think that sometimes in that sort of production, if it's not one-sided, and they frequently are not, and I'm not suggesting that they're trying to do anything illicit, but you have a point of view when you do a documentary. that sometimes it puts information out in the public that may not be fully accurate, may not be completely nuanced, and that worries me.
Ritter, let me get you in trouble because you always hear, well, if it was the Menendez sisters, they would have been out, 25 years ago or something. Is there a double standard?
Well, I think there was a double standard 30 years ago, and I'm not saying that just because I'm trying to imagine what it was like, but the jurors themselves, in interviews since that time, we know that they were considering things like the fact that these were men and why didn't they just fight back? And there's no way that they would allow themselves to be abused. They must have somehow conceded to the whole thing. Then there was a lot of questions even about Erik's sexuality at that time. A lot of discussions taking place amongst the jurors that I think probably reflect a different view. Certainly would not have been discussed if these were the Menendez sisters. So I do think that that did have an effect. Sure.
Josh, back to you on this. What about Mark Geragos? Obviously, super high profile attorney. We've had him on this show speaking about this topic. Does either of you, let's start with Josh, know about their, obviously they came from a very wealthy family. That was here. Hang on a sec. I think this is just a random reporter, dude. Obviously they came from an extremely wealthy family, and some people think money was the motive for this. Others, of course, think it was the abuse. Some think it was a combination. But when it comes to the financial aspect here, who do you think is paying for these lawyers? Think it's other family members or them or what?
I don't think they have money. I don't know. My guess is that they don't have money. My guess is also that Mark Geragos is a very savvy media person and attorney, and he's a friend. So I say this in confidence that he would not disagree with me, but I'm sure that there is some advantage to the opportunity to represent these two men and the opportunity to be in front of as many cameras as he has been and will be later on this morning. And whatever documentaries and everything else that may come out of this whole thing. So I think there's probably more ways for an attorney to be compensated than just writing a check.
Right on cue. Phantom 6000, again, a lawyer out of LA. Throw this one to Joe. There's a bag of money waiting for the brothers. Why do you think Geragos and Friedman are jumping on board? I hate to say it, maybe family members. If son of Sam, meaning you can't profit, right? Who would enforce it, Joe? Very hard to enforce this.
Yeah, and I don't know. There was a lot of money because the stories at the time, the amount of money they spent right in that year after the father and mother were killed was an enormous amount of money. And in today's figures, would be what, 10, 20 times as much. I don't know whether there's still money left. I'll defer to your best guess that there's money out there. The son of Sam law, and I don't even know if that's Josh, is that a federal statute? I guess it is.
I think so.
But there's some limits on it in terms of the ability to profit. But I don't know. I'd have to look at the statute to see the extent to which it would apply to a lawyer or others who are not in the direct line of the individuals who are accused of the crime. So maybe one of your best guests, Joe, would have a better handle on that than I do. But I will tell you that I will find it a little troubling if they are released and they go on the TV circuit and everything else. I just think it would be, in my view, unseemly because there were two people killed and their father may have been a massive molester and the mother may have been complicit and not wanted children. I saw one of the guests say that, but that doesn't allow you to go ahead and blow our head off with a shotgun or whatever they used.
Yeah. Let me put you both on the spot again. Josh, do you think that they are a danger to society at this point? In other words, if they were let out, would you be fearful that one or both of them, would act in a criminal way again?
Well, here's the way I think that prosecutors would look at it is that, or a judge, is that one, they never committed a crime before that. Well, they did commit, apparently as juveniles, some home invasion burglaries. But putting that aside, you've got basically no criminal record. This horrible, horrible murder, 2 murders, and then apparently living a life crime-free and contributing to society as much as they can since they've been in prison. So there's an argument that, hey, part of our prison system is about rehabilitation. And here's 2 men who've demonstrated that they have been rehabilitated. But then at the same time, there are many arguments that say, well, listen, there's a lot of people who did a lot of good since they've been in prison, but they've committed murders that are just so heinous that we can't even contemplate the idea of them ever being released. Susan Smith was just up for parole last week, and a lot of people felt like they never want to see this woman outside of a prison ever again for having taken the lives of her 2 children. So, just because a lot of time has passed, I don't think you can necessarily say that, well, they may not ever commit a crime again, but is that the ultimate question that needs to be answered by a judge in this case?
Yeah, that's interesting. Jennifer Levy, unrelated, but will you be covering Sarah Boone? Yes. I'm not going up to Orlando, but we're going to have it live on our channel with live coverage and analysis, and very well might be these 2, even though they don't know it yet. But she's going to be sentenced Monday. I believe it's 1:30 p.m. I've already put in a show for that. Someone was asking, did the hearing happen already? The hearing is happening right now. They should be about 54 minutes into it. Was scheduled to start at 10:30 a.m. local time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern, which is where Joe and I are. And we just don't know because cameras are not allowed in. Cell phones were taken before anyone was allowed in. And so no one really knows. But you see, we're looking at a camera here of the exterior of the courthouse in Van Nuys, which is where the proceedings are taking place today.
So,
yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Can I add a little to what Josh said? I agree with everything he said, but I would like to add something. It is certainly clear that sentences in some states in the United States are much heavier than other states, and certainly in Europe, in terms of how we treat defendants who have committed crimes. But the people of a state have the right to decide by statute what they think the penalty should be. And in this case, they decided by legislative act that the penalty for first-degree murder with special conditions could be life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. That's what they got. Part of I think the uproar is over the decision by the state of California to make that the penalty. And I saw some of the people, the best gets on the chat, talking about the uneven nature of giving this to high-profile defendants when there are others sitting in prison who might have had available to them the same sort of argument if they had the same sort of public attention brought to it. And that feeds into the sort of the uneven nature of how the system works. So I do think there's a consideration on the other side, and it's that consideration. What do we do in terms of the decision by the people of California to enact this sort of penalty and the uneven nature of this sort of way of correcting for what we might think is too much time in prison? I'm not answering the way it should come out, but I don't think it's a simple question. Gee, it's 30 years and they haven't done anything. I might add, they haven't done anything because they've been in prison. I agree that it's unlikely they would recidivate in this way. But the argument that there's a clean record is an interesting argument because they're in prison and the circumstances in prison. And there's a lot of research on this. It's a controlled environment where you don't get to make individual choices. It's structured, and it is not very predictive of how people will act once they're out of that environment and able to make free choices on their own.
Well said there. From Leah Wynn here to Josh. I mean, this is one of the rubs against the brothers. Lyle spent more than $15,000 on half of a Rolex watch now is $15,000. Just the band is $15,000, but 15 grand on 3 Rolex watches the day before his parents' funeral. Witnesses, and he would later testify, in addition to thousands of dollars in gambling losses. I mean, Josh, how do you square the money part of this with the alleged abuse part of this? Again, this is where they're going to have trouble with a judge. You know, when the judge reviews the case file and sees all this, I think that's what would potentially trip somebody up. That, and of course, Kitty Menendez.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the reports were that they spent upwards of $700,000 in 1989 money within weeks of their parents' murder, and that, in fact, that was the reason that they landed on the radar of law enforcement at the time, even though the doctor, their psychiatrist, Oziel, came forward saying that they confessed to them. They were being looked at. They were being investigated before then, if nothing more than this kind of wild spending spree that they went on. And, you know, that's why I think a lot of people, prosecutors who worked on this case at the time, people who lived through this, felt that their defense was fabricated, or even if they had suffered abuse, that was what they turned to, even though their real motivation behind all of this was to inherit millions of dollars. So it's, you know, you're right. It's an excellent point for the prosecution, and it's something that people have pointed to, you know, years later as kind of trying to undercut this idea that they were just simply victims.
By the way, I'm just reading a little bit about what's going on. There's Erik Menendez has a high school friend there today, a guy named Nick Bonanno, who's walking around with a photo of Erik when he was in high school. So that's interesting that they've got this support. They do have a ton of support, and not just from the public, but from family members and close friends. You see Leah Wynn here with more info on the finances. Menendez's home sold in 1991 for $3.6 million. That house today would probably be like $25 million. A loss of nearly $1.2 million, all of which went to pay off the mortgage, closing costs, and the IRS, the lovely IRS. Amanda brings up an interesting point here in the chat. Parents who say that they would, you know what, an abuser of their own kids. What if the kids' parents were there, aren't there to protect them? Food for thought. Interesting point. We've had Jody Plauché on, whose dad basically took matters into his own hands when he found out his son Jody was being essayed by his karate instructor, and he shot him while cameras were rolling in a Baton Rouge, Louisiana airport. So that was kind of crazy. Someone's asking about a law against monetizing. We talked about that with the Son of Sam law, but Joe Patuto, there's a lot of people who are saying, look, sadly, there are many, many victims of child, SA, but the vast majority, 99.9%, do not turn around and kill their parents. So why are they allowed to here? What would your response be to that?
That most kids who are abused do not go ahead and kill their parents. So why should they be allowed to do it here? Did I understand the question? Well, that's the argument that's being made about this, that, our system says no matter what the injury to you, however terrible it is, the answer is that the state, through a prosecution, should take care of it, that you're not entitled to do vigilante justice. That if we started going down that road, people in this case, we may say what happened, it was true, and that, the decision to kill might have been, we might be sympathetic with it and say it's okay, but people make mistakes also. And once you start down this road, so you don't have a hearing, you don't have a trial, you risk all kinds of problems. And the issue, again, is the uneven nature of, how the justice system is going to work. I really do think it is not a good way for the system to work, to permit these sorts of defenses when there is not a clear legal defense that applies. There's a clear legal defense that applies, then everybody has the same opportunity. And somebody who doesn't do it makes a different choice. I guess I would hope that person found help, left the situation, and I guess applaud them for finding a different way to go about it than to kill someone in order to get there. Although, not a great answer, but it's the best one I have.
Just to show the extravagance and the wealth they came from, the house that they were living in Beverly Hills. And they did grow up in New Jersey, but they moved to Beverly Hills. That Beverly Hills house sold just this past March for $17 million. What people don't know, Josh Ritter is living in it right now. Yeah, Josh Ritter.
I had to redecorate a little bit.
Yeah, had to redecorate, get the Christmas lights up. So Josh Ritter, it has now been an hour and 3 minutes. You said you thought this was going to be a short hearing. Obviously, we're over an hour now. For those who are just joining, there are no cameras that were allowed into the actual courtroom, but there's a ton of cameras outside. Everyone's kind of waiting to find out your best guess. What's going on in there? Why a short hearing, now a long hearing? Is it because they are getting testimony from this elderly aunt, Joan Vandermolen?
I think that could be part of it. I know that I read or saw a report that Geragos was going to request that, so that could be part of it. I mean, I think the other thing too is this is the first time they've been back in court in 30 years after all of this kind of, movement out of nowhere to do something about this. So probably a lot of attorneys liking to be heard on both sides are kind of making their record. But yeah, I'm a little surprised that it's taking this long. We do know that it's actually happening, right? That they didn't start late.
As far as I know, because I'm seeing people who are going into the courtroom an hour ago, but you never know with courts, and there would be no way to know because it's the phones were taken from everybody. A little bit of levity here that at my expense from Rachel D. Back to my mom for the holidays. The one who mistook the COE for your daughter. It's horrible. I do not look that old. She does not look that young. I'm gonna have to have a word with your mother. Julie Frew. Now I'm starting to get unraveled here. Julie Frew is one of our amazing mods, as all of our mods are. But Julie seems to know the answers to every single question as it pertains to all these criminal cases. She's like a savant when it comes to these stories. So yeah, we're just sitting here now. We are waiting. We're assuming, there's no way, Josh Ritter, that Mark Geragos is not going to go in front of the cameras when this hearing is over. What would the chance of him not appearing be? Like 1%?
Yeah, there's a far better chance of them getting out today than there's any chance of Mark not stepping in front of a microphone to talk about it. So, yeah, we'll be hearing, and I'm sure he'll give us an amazing recitation of everything that took place inside the courtroom. But I will say that still being a working attorney in Los Angeles, it is not uncommon to show up to court and sit in court for an hour to have your 5-minute hearing. So I hope that they're getting business done in there right now. But, it's just kind of the nature of the court system is it's a lot of hurry up and wait.
Joe Patuto, this guy Gascon, who's a DA. Do you think that George Gascon, do you think there was, I guess, like a pure bone in his heart, or is it simply a political calculation for him because it was during an election and he was trying to get some kind of popular vote, or, the people who are empathetic to the Menendez brothers? Was it simply political, or you think it was more than that?
I think it was more than that. And my reason for saying that is I think he established a resentencing commission maybe 2-3 years ago. I had the date here because I looked it up, 2021. And they were charged with looking at a number of prisoners and making recommendations for resentencing. And they have recommended more than 330 resentencing. So I think it's a different perspective on the length of time that someone should serve in prison. I also think it is partly related to maybe overcrowding in the prisons and trying to move out people who have long sentences where determination can be made that they've served long enough. But I don't know that I'd say it's a political calculation, but if you're running on a progressive towards crime platform, then you're going to have, I would say, a genuine view as to what sentences should look like, and that's going to move you also.
Yeah. Speaking of these sentences, Josh Ritter, I've seen people in the chat say that they had, a lot of infractions, but from everything that I've read during their 30 plus years behind bars, there was only one allegation of violence. I think that was against Lyle, and it was early on. They've had really, as far as I know, unless someone has evidence to the contrary, they've had really clean prison records. By the way, Josh, we're starting an STS calendar, and everybody's already made you Mr. February. So make sure you get your
the
fire.
shortest month. I'll take it.
Yeah. In the coldest.
Yeah.
In the coldest.
But Josh Ritter, what about, how closely will a judge look at their prison record in terms of these infractions?
I don't think a judge is going to look at it all that closely. Now, if they had committed major infractions, assaults, murders, other, really horrible crimes, since they had been in prison, that would be a major problem. But I don't, I know that Gascon and other people have pointed towards the idea that they've been model inmates. I think if we're being honest, though, that's not what's driving this. What's driving this is kind of public sentiment. It was astonishing to me that Gascon referenced the Netflix series a couple of times. He talked about how his office was receiving phone calls, and they were receiving so many phone calls that they almost couldn't answer them all in response to people trying to push towards them reevaluating the Menendez case. So they're mentioning their kind of exemplary behavior in prison, but really it sounds to me, at least out of his own mouth, that this had a lot more to do with just kind of a public push towards this. The other thing to keep in mind, we talked a little bit about, did politics play a role? I don't know if it did, but I will point this out. The habeas was filed in May of 2023. He didn't have a press conference on this until it was September, October of 2024, when there was an election in November. So it's interesting to me, the timing and when this all really started to gain momentum.
Yeah. Josh, by the way, I know you have some other commitments. So, obviously we want you here, but if you got to bounce, let us know. Cause
I appreciate that. I'll let you know.
Okay. Sounds good. So Deanna here saying Lyle had to be moved to a special unit because he wouldn't even defend himself. Then Lyle did not have a violent infraction. It's mostly possession of a cell phone. Same with Erik, or not following instructions immediately, I guess. Erik was in 2 fights over 30 years. That's kind of crazy when you consider it's prison. So I guess kudos to them for behaving behind bars. It's just so crazy to me because I remember when they first went in, and now it's been 35 years later. I was reading if there is a parole hearing, the board has granted parole in about 31% of the cases it has heard so far this year. Joe Pachuto, that's obviously about a third. Does that favor them, you think? Doesn't favor them, or doesn't even matter in terms of?
I don't know. I don't know. I can't. A third means 2/3 or not. I don't know how the parole board operates. Josh, is the parole board appointed by the governor? Are they elected? How does the parole board work?
You got me there. I'm not sure. I will say though that that has changed a lot too since Gascon became the DA. It used to be that a representative from the DA's office would show up at these parole hearings, and he stopped that practice. Now, if Nathan Hochman comes in and changes that back to having a representative from the DA's office at these parole hearings, I don't know what change that will have on the amount of people who get parole. But And I don't know what that will do about this case if the DA does take a position that they're in favor of parole. So there's still a lot of moving parts in this whole thing before we're ever going to see footage of them walking out of a prison.
Yeah. By the way, the series Monsters, which is about Lyle and Erik Menendez, Mark Garagos, who's their attorney, was very vocal that it was kind of a cartoonish take on what really happened. Tons of people watched it, but it was also heavily criticized for at least portraying accuracy. So I'm just looking up what Joan Vandermolen, she is the one that could be giving testimony right now. Josh Ritter said there's a possibility that's going on because she is 93 years old. She is Lyle and Erik's aunt. She is Kitty Menendez's sister. And she said recently there's more than 20 members of Lyle and Erik's family that flew out to Los Angeles recently and supported them, which is part of the reason we're here now. Let's just hold it there, Josh. I mean, what about the fact that the 20 family members came out? Is that a catalyst for this as well? Just knowing that they've got support from family members who are close to them on the parents, obviously on their parents' side because they're parents' kids.
I mean, I firmly believe that if it was not for this tremendous family support for the brothers, we wouldn't even be talking about this. I don't think there's any way it would have received any traction, habeas petition or not, if it wasn't for the family members being so involved. And like you said, to the point of traveling, giving their own press conference. I mean, they have really united in this effort. And that does play a role. It certainly plays a role in the DA's decision. And I think it will play a role in the judge's decision, because that's one of the things that a judge has to take into consideration. It's written into the law in California. They have to consider the victims and give them an opportunity to be heard. And in this case, the victims are in support of this resentencing, aside from one very vocal family member who's filed a amicus brief adamantly objecting to it. They will be given an opportunity to be heard as well.
And I assume that it'll also have an impact if this goes to a situation in which the parole board is considering it, because there won't be family members. Think of Susan Smith's parole hearing. There won't be family members getting up in opposition to the parole. There'll be family members supporting it.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, you saw at the Susan Smith parole hearing, I mean, her ex-husband, many family members just coming out against the idea of paroling her. Joe, about that for a minute, what are your thoughts on the fact that in South Carolina, Susan Smith can go for parole every 2 years and put that family through that over and over again?
Yeah, I think it's terrible for the families. I mean, you relive. I mean, they say when you're a victim to a crime, you're the victim, and that's the first victimization. And then the trial and going through the trial is the second victimization. And for those family members, it's going to be every 2 years reliving it. It's terrible. Now, on the other side, if the parole decision is supposed to be is someone rehabilitated, and the system says that someone is entitled to parole, and the system says we want it considered every 2 years, then that's the decision the state of South Carolina has made. And that's the balance they've made. And I think we have to live with it. But it's horrific for the family members. I cannot imagine having to go through that every 2 years. I mean, it's like you go through it once and then you have to wind down from it. And before you know it, you have to get yourself ready to go do it again. It's terrible.
And LFT Decipher here just letting us know it is their uncle, the mother's brother, and Joan, the older woman, her brother, who's opposed to Lyle and Erik Menendez's release. He's probably the most well-known, high-profile of the people in terms of family members that are against their release. But Joan Vandermolen, Josh Ritter, she spoke recently at another one of these a few weeks back. She says she had no idea of the extent of the abuse, that they were brutalized in the most horrific ways. In the years since their conviction, knowledge of SA has grown exponentially, and said it basically, if they were tried today, Jose's abuse would be admitted. No jury would have reacted the same way. Those are pretty coherent and strong statements from a 93-year-old woman.
Don't be an ageist.
Sorry there, John.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think she's right. Back in the 90s, even then it hung both juries. They were fairly strongly split. This wasn't like a close call. And if it wasn't for the changes in what the judge allowed as far as evidence, I think it likely would have hung again. Now, what's interesting is that it didn't hang with acquittal. It hung between murder and manslaughter.
Right.
And so that's what I think a lot of people may not appreciate, is that they were never arguing for an acquittal. They were arguing for a manslaughter. And had they been sentenced to a manslaughter, they would have been out years ago. So they were to some extent, not arguing the fact that they'd committed these horrible crimes. They were just saying, listen, there's mitigating circumstances for it that may not have been appreciated as much back then as they might today. And I think that's the point of the ant.
Josh Ritter, your better half has informed us that you've got under 5 minutes. So I don't know if do you have a, Josh and I are both ruled by the COEs. That's who decides our fate. Ritter, any final thoughts because now I'm afraid of your wife too, and I don't want her yelling at me.
Rightfully so. You're a smart man. No, I just think it's it's pretty phenomenal to me that a case that is 30 years old and we all thought was kind of done and decided has seen new life, and it is, I think, one of those cases where we're still talking about it from both sides. I could talk about this case for hours and turn myself in circles, because I really do see a lot of the nuance in the whole thing. I don't think it's all clear cut and black and white. And I think I at first, when this habeas was filed, I said no chance. And with each passing motion and the more momentum they get, I do think there's a realistic possibility that we will be seeing them walking out of a prison someday soon.
Look at this, Josh. We're talking about a really serious case here, life and death in many different aspects. And you got Ned Smith, who is the coach of the Rams. He's hot. What's going on here? Ned Smith, look at this. She says the coach of the Rams needs to be on the STS calendar. Ned Smith, you're in charge of putting that together. Always a little levity with true crime. Josh Ritter, he is the host of Courtroom Confidential. He's LA Prosecutor of the Year, super smart criminal defense attorney. You better check out Courtroom Confidential. Josh, thank you so much for being here, man.
Thank you, guys.
Soon.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, take care. Let me bounce Josh right out of there. So another character in this story, and by the way, it's now an hour and 20 minutes as this hearing has been going on, which is interesting because I did not think it was going to go this long. I don't think anybody did. Is this guy, Dr. Oziel? He was Erik's therapist. Erik confided in this guy, and then he had a mistress, of course, because it's LA, it's Hollywood, and his mistress, a woman named Judalyn Smith, she finds out what Erik is telling Dr. Oziel and goes and tips off police, which is really how they got caught in all this. How does that complicate the case?
Well, it complicated it initially because, as I recall, Dr. Oziel testified at the trial, and the issue was whether there was privilege and was he entitled to disclose what Erik had told him. But that was vetted at the trial. I am sure, although I didn't see the appellate brief here, that was raised on appeal as a reversible error, and the appellate court did not see that it was something that required reversing the conviction. The first trial was interesting. There were two separate juries, and they were moved in and out as evidence was admissible against one brother and not the other brother. And it was as I watched it, a pretty complicated logistical management of the courtroom to move in and out. And it was done so neither jury would hear evidence that was admissible against one brother, but they couldn't hear with regard to the other brother. And as I recall, you've got some guests who remember the trial better than I do, I think. But as I recall, with regard to the one of the juries came in first as hung, and there was some comment. I tried to Google it and I didn't find it, where the brother whose trial ended with a hung jury first made some comment that could be construed as, we fooled one jury, now we just have to wait to fool the other. That wasn't the language, but it was pretty equivocal language when it was picked up in the press pretty broadly at the time. And I wish I could remember it better, and I don't.
Yeah.
But I'll say something else about the first trial was really remarkable. And I'm sorry Josh isn't here anymore, because opening statements to a jury are really important, because if you can get them to buy your version of what occurred, they will try, when they hear this evidence coming in every which way, they will try to fit it into your theory. And they interviewed some of the jurors after the first trials were interviewed. And one of them was asked, well, there was evidence that the brothers went back out to the car, they came back in, and then they shot Kitty some more. How can you explain that in terms of your feeling that they were not guilty? And this juror said, well, I just believe they were so upset that whichever brother testified was just mistaken as to what happened. And that's a statement of, if lawyers can get the jury to buy into their theory of the case, you will get jurors sometimes to turn themselves into pretzels to make the evidence fit what they now see as the theme of the case.
Yeah. Joe, hang on, 'cause we're getting some movement here from
They're done, you think?
I don't know, but the media, if one person moves, they all move, which is what's happening right now. So I don't see, I obviously saw, or I'm watching them take up a new position. This is, by the way, is a little fraction of the media that's there. And obviously the camera we're watching is behind these guys, but you can see people starting to move to the top step. While we're waiting for this, you've got the Professor Joe Patuto. If you have any questions for her, triple Qs, capital Qs, and I will ask her questions as we go here. But
well, and meanwhile, I'll say something about the sister testifying, if there's no one there to cross-examine, because were I there, and I know I sound as though they should be in prison the rest of their life, and I have very mixed feelings about it, but if I were there cross-examining, I would be interested in how she came to the conclusion that the brothers were so badly abused. Did she feel that at the time, or was it because of a Netflix documentary that she saw, or information from others?
Test, or you're okay? You guys want to test? Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Para los de español, 1, 2, 3, 4.
they are doing audio.
They think something is going on, don't they?
Looks like they're waiting for them to come out. COE?
Hey, I don't know. I'm seeing some stuff popping up here on Twitter. People are saying that the Menendez brothers hearing was pushed to January 30th, but I'm unsure of any details, so I'm just
taking. Well, they're gonna. Garagos is gonna have to come out. Let me see.
Yeah, they will, but people are saying it's wrapping up and they're coming out soon.
Okay.
So it took them an hour and a half to decide they're going to do it in January.
I'm unsure if that's confirmed, so we're still getting more information.
Well, I think it's a great story. Wow.
Yeah, so I'm seeing this also. This is from a senior writer with LA Magazine, is saying that the Menendez brothers hearing has now been pushed to January 30th, but the judge did hear, Joe, from elderly sisters of Kitty and Jose Menendez who want their nephews home. A lot of people were saying that they'd be home by Christmas. Maybe it doesn't seem like that's
Not
the
if they're
case.
having the hearing on January 30th, they're not.
Yeah. What's your reaction to this?
Without knowing what it was that they did today, it's hard to say. It may be that he's looking for more evidence. Then one of the lawyers may have asked for time to present some evidence. It may be that somebody made the claim that the new prosecutor will be coming in, and he may have a different view of this, and the office should have the opportunity to present the case as he would like it to be presented. I mean, these are all just guesses. I have no idea what wasn't done today that he's pushing off to January 30th, which would come after the resentence hearing, which I think is on December 12th. I mean, there were 3 different ways this could be handled.
So do we know what, do we know what could happen with that December 12th hearing, which is like 2 weeks away?
Well, it's part of the question is going to be whether the new DA has a different position from the outgoing DA with regard to a recommendation about resentencing. And that, if the new DA comes in saying, I think there needs to be a resentencing also, and you have only one family member who's opposing it, and no one else is coming in to push on the other side, it might be, pretty quickly, and there would be a resentencing. But that's only a guess, and I would at least be willing to guess that the new DA is not going to take the position the outgoing DA took.
Black Widow, always generous, gifting 10 Surviving the Survivor memberships. I'll tell you, my biggest worry right now is our camera guys behind all the other cameras. What's the camera guy doing? Get up there. We're about to find out. Again, reports are coming out slowly from this hearing that that Joan Vandermolen, the sister of Kitty Menendez, testified under oath in that courthouse. But now the judge is pushing a actual hearing to hear further evidence and make a further decision to January 30th of 2025. From Mossberg Mom, kind of talked about this. Does Professor Joe think they would get paroled if given the chance, which is another, I guess, possibility?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether that's what I asked Josh, whether the parole board is appointed or elected. I mean, parole boards also have a point of view as to the availability of parole, and they differ in terms of what they think needs. I mean, there are legal standards about what you have to do to be paroled, but parole boards differ in terms of how skeptical they are about the information that's coming in. So I don't have a guess about it.
Jimmy McNutty, he's a trial watcher since the days of the Menendez brothers, and he says that this new guy, Nate Hochman, the new DA is going to keep them in prison.
Yeah.
Go, Nate. COE, what's happening?
2 court dates have been set for January 30th and January 31st.
And do we know why or what or how or?
We don't. It says updates to come.
And do we know what about that December 11th hearing? Do we know anything about that?
Well, that's independent of this one.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, COE just bounced out. So we are in wait and see mode here right now. I'm still just trying to figure out why our camera guy, who we're keeping tabs on, is behind the other camera guys, but I guess that's his problem, not mine. And we'll figure that out.
You would think he'd be able to circle, or he must not be from the area country where you and I come from, because you'd think he'd be able to circle around and come to the front without much trouble.
He's not a pushy New Jersey, New Yorker. He's got to get up there.
He does. You need to give him some lessons.
Yeah, exactly. Ned Smith, this will definitely happen. We'll do Fred as Mr. June. Would be amazing. We're sitting here watching. We talked about pretty much everything on planet Earth we can talk about. For those who have been living under a rock, the Menendez brothers have been in prison for over 35 years or behind bars. About an hour and 32 minutes ago, there was a hearing that started. It's behind closed doors, no cameras allowed. And now we're getting word that that the aunt of Erik and Lyle, Joan Vandermolen, who's in her 90s, that she testified or gave some sort of testimony today. And now these hearings are being pushed to January 30th and 31st, COE.
Hey, so we're still waiting for some more information. Hold on, the kids are.
Pure guess. If he's scheduled it for 2 days in January, that sounds as though it's going to be an evidentiary hearing.
Yeah.
Because if it was simply going to be argument from lawyers and a decision, you wouldn't schedule it over 2 days.
Yeah. And so, Joe, what does that mean? Like, what would we be seeing if it was over a 2-day period? It'd be
Well,
like a
they
mini
would bring
trial.
in, they bring in witnesses from each side, and assuming that the new prosecutor wants to take a position contrary to the Menendez brothers, you would see somebody from the LADA's office presenting evidence and cross-examining witnesses. Habeas corpus, since it's a separate proceeding, it's not an appeal. On appeal, you can't take evidence. You can't have witnesses testify. On appeal, you're restricted to what the record was at trial, and the lawyers get up and they make arguments, and that's it. But a habeas corpus proceeding is a proceeding after all the appeals are done. And of course, these appeals were done 28, 30 years ago, 34 years ago. And you start again. And in a habeas hearing, the judge is entitled to take evidence. And so if the question is the new evidence, they may be doing things like the bona fides of the letter. It may be, was Kitty's brother there today? It may be that the brother will testify. It's a little hard to guess because I don't know who's presenting that side in the hearing.
Well, we're getting COE. Do you have something? Because I'm getting some news here.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give you guys some updates. So the Superior Court judge did postpone the December 11th hearing to January 30th and 31st. And during the proceedings today, the older sisters of Kitty and Jose Menendez did testify. And the attorneys for the Menendez brothers requested that the judge reconsider the convictions of both brothers. And again, all of that has been pushed back. They were hoping to try to get out earlier and hoping to be home by Thanksgiving or for the holiday season. But obviously, that's not going to be happening. We're also told that the Menendez brothers attended virtually because they are still incarcerated in San Diego. And the courtroom had 16 seats available. As many of you guys already know, the public was able to enter via lottery. So that's all of the details that we have right now. Again, I'm sure they're going to come out and give us some more information and some updates, but that's what I was able to confirm.
Yeah. Fox News Digital had some reporting pretty much echoing what the COE just said, that this California judge, LA judge, Jessic, Jesic, he's delayed the resentencing hearing for Erik and Joseph Lyle Menendez, who have been serving time since 1989, 90, I believe. Outgoing Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon asked the court to reduce their sentences less than 2 weeks before Election Day. Now the judge saying that he likely wouldn't be ready for the previously scheduled December 11th hearing. Says he's now, as the COE just said, is going to push it back to January, quote unquote, out of respect for the new administration. All sides agreed to this. Both sides tentatively agreed to January 30th through 31, January 30th and 31st, but the judge did not formally set it in his calendar. Wow. And due to a technical glitch, the brothers did not appear virtually as expected. Garagos waived their right to appear.
I'm just kidding.
While court addressed the scheduling. That's interesting. So it's going to be the first time we've seen them in many, many years at a court hearing. What do you make of that, Joe? That's an interesting time for a technical glitch.
When Josh was guessing what the delay might have been, what ran through my head was technical problems. And I assume they waited a little while before they decided there was no way that they were going to appear. The lawyer has the right to waive on their behalf, but you would think that he would have at least consulted, maybe talked to them by phone about going ahead with the hearing, even if they weren't there to watch it. I guess I'm a little surprised that the judge who's doing this habeas corpus hearing is also the judge that was doing the resentencing hearing in December. And therefore he spoke for himself by saying he's going to delay the resentence hearing, but that doesn't answer what happened at this hearing. That says the other hearing, that is the resentencing, is being moved back. But this hearing was the habeas corpus hearing. That is, was there enough reason for him to say the brothers are entitled to a new trial? And I didn't hear any information about that.
By the way, it makes me feel better knowing that, oftentimes we'll have some technical issues here at the podcast, but here you've got Lyle and Erik Menendez behind bars for 35 years. By the way, see that guy, the gray hair and the glasses, front right next to the woman in the blue coat?
With the jacket, the brown jacket or whatever he is?
On the right side of the screen. So that guy with the gray hair, glasses, talking to the two women in the very, very forefront, that is the person who is high school friends with Erik Menendez. He showed up today with a high school yearbook photo from, I think, New Jersey days. So that's him, traveled all the way out there for this. So there you go. Some people that you would not expect to be there are, in fact, there. So right now, we've been on the air heading into the second hour almost, an hour, and I think I don't know, it's been a while, hour 39 minutes, I believe, that we've been on the air, an hour and 39 minutes that this hearing supposedly started ago, and we are now waiting for Mark Garagos, who is Lyle and Erik Menendez's attorney, and a guy named Brian Friedman, who's representing the families, who's also a high-profile, high-powered LA attorney. So we're expecting both of them to make some comments. Things got a little crazy with the cameras. People were moving. Now now we're just waiting to see who comes out and who is going to speak. Look at this, 2.2 thousand watching, only 500. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you appreciate the content. And please share the show with friends. And the debate here is continuing about whether they should be free or stuck in prison. It's an interesting question. Joe Patuto, why make a 90-something-year-old woman come all the way out, presumably from the East Coast? Couldn't she have just signed a sworn affidavit?
For the purposes of this hearing, yes. If there's if the judge were to grant a new trial and this went back for a new trial, they're better off having the live testimony than an affidavit that may or may not be able to be introduced. Probably could be, but the live testimony would be better. But even the live testimony is like a deposition if there was nobody from the other side to cross-examine her. But, for trial purposes, if you have a witness who is effective, you are always much better to have the live witness come out and talk than to have somebody read something from a sterile piece of paper. It doesn't have the same impact on the jury. And I assume an older woman who's the sister of one of the victims who is talking in favor of her two nephews would have much greater impact if you could see her in person.
Yeah, that's a good point. Looks like there's Garagos. That's Mark Garagos coming out. And I think that's Brian Friedman to his right. We're going to hear from them. Mark Garagos is telling everyone where to go. He's the interviewee and the director. Here we go. COE.
Security had asked everyone to stay back, which is why our camera stayed back. And by our camera, I mean the AP and Reuters.
Yeah, shout out to AP and Reuters. There's Mark Garagos in the blue suit, Brian Friedman with him. Going to take some questions.
For those who weren't in the courtroom today, I think you could talk to anybody who was. It was a very, it was first of all, the first time that Lyle and Erik have been at least remotely in a courtroom in a number of years, number one. It also was quite a moving experience, at least from where we sit, to listen to Aunt Terry and Aunt Joan, who are respectively Jose and Kitty's older sisters. Both made impassioned pleas with the judge to send the brothers home. And like I said, very moving. Terry testified under oath that she was very close to Jose and practically grew up with him. And Joan as well talked about Kitty and all of the good things that they've done since they've been in there. The judge has now set January 30th and 31st as the days for a plenary or fulsome hearing on the resentencing. He has also invoked what's called AB 600, so he has jurisdiction under that section as well, which is California law. He's going to and has heard and will ask for further briefing. And by January 30th or 31st, we're hoping that by the end of that or sometime sooner, that we will in fact get the brothers' release. The family is all here, and including Joan, who's here, who everybody can wish happy birthday to tomorrow. And Terry, who is here.
Yes, where's Terry?
Where's Terry? Terry's in the back. Terry made the trip.
Bring Terry up here.
Bring Terry up as well. I will tell you that I did not program either one of them, and I don't think either one of them knew they were going to speak, but they spoke, and we did that so they could speak from the heart. And
we're sisters in kind.
Terry is Jose's older sister.
You can tell them you want them home.
I do want them home. They should never have been in such situations that presented themselves. What can a kid do when his father's? Oh, I can't stand it.
35 years is a long time. I think
it's time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
She basically, it was hard to hear. So
I'm going to let the family go. I'll answer some questions as long as people don't assault the family on the way out of here. Okay. Is that a deal, by the way? Yes. Okay. So let the family move out and have
media, please move back.
Yeah, please move back. Let them create a walkway.
You're not family. You need to move back, please.
See, they already violated, right? No deal. Then I guess no questions if they're going to run after.
why are they doing this?
Yeah, no question.
Oh, wait, Mark, can we ask you about
Unless you stop that, then we're not doing it.
No bearing on that.
They're not
Mark,
real
can we ask
journalists,
about the
Mark.
petition that was filed this morning, get rid of the special circumstance?
Media giving itself a great name, harassing 90-year-olds.
Sorry. Just
Jeff, that was that live, right?
Oh, he's back. Josh Ritter is back. we're just watching this play out. Mark Garagos was going to take questions, and then when the media did not cooperate and started hounding Joan Vandermolen and Terry, who's the other aunt, the older brother of Jose Menendez, Garagos said no questions, and he took off. So let's give this a minute. Josh Ritter, while we're waiting for this, we'll just keep an eye on it. I'm sure you heard the news. So this is now the December 11th hearing has been eliminated for all intents and purposes. And this judge did hear under oath from Terry, who is the Aunt Terry, who is the older sister of Jose Menendez. And they also heard from Joan Vandermolen, the older sister of Kitty Menendez, who basically spoke about why the boy should be let out. And then Garagos came out and said that there's a hearing scheduled for the 30th and 31st, a plenary or fulsome hearing on resentencing. What the hell does that mean?
I think what he means is that they're going to actually have the hearing. Today was kind of the hearing to have the hearing. What I did hear as well is that the judge said that he wants to give an opportunity to the new DA, Nathan Hochman, to be able to weigh in on this, because he hasn't even assumed office. So he hasn't even been able to review what the DA has in their possession yet to weigh in on this. And the judge said that he's got 17 boxes of materials to go through. So this is no small undertaking. And it sounds like this judge wants to make sure that he goes through everything himself and is not just going to make a decision based upon the motions, which is good, because it doesn't sound like, it sounds like he's only getting one side of things. So it would be good for this judge to independently, even if he decides to agree with the DA's position, make a good record as to why he's doing that. Because this is not a small thing. I mean, we want to depend on jury verdicts. We want those to be the end of a case, and to believe that's how, a case, the finality, brings some finality to this, to a case with a jury verdict. So to overturn that or even change that is no small undertaking.
Yeah. Jennifer Ford, as you can see, she's got those 3 letters. I mean, she's a lawyer, Esquire. The answer, this is to be answered by the professor. Since when does family make legal decisions? In every case, the state asks the position of the family of the victims. Prosecutors give a lot of weight and deference to the family. It sounds like Jennifer Ford thinks that that they're literally deciding here. I don't know that that's the case, but they're getting a lot of weight, Joe.
Well, they do, and they are listened to in terms of the decision to take a plea, the decision as to what a sentence recommendation would look like. There was a time when victims had no voice at all in any of this, so they are listened to, but they don't have the determinative voice, and they can't weigh in on what the legal requirements are. I mean, they can talk about how they would like the result to be and why, but they can't weigh in on whether the law is going to permit it. That has to be the judge that does that. So, Josh, what do you think? Do you think that the DA, in terms of the 17 boxes that the judge has, which would, I assume, also be information that the defense has pointed to, is going to be considered by the incoming DA to be a fair representation of the issues, since the outgoing DA was in support of this decision to release, or to at least resentence so they could be released?
Yeah, I imagine that a large part of those 17 boxes is the trial, transcripts and exhibits and everything else that, are important, but maybe not is so important to the decision that he has to make on whether or not he agrees with this idea on striking the special circumstance. But I applaud the new DA for not just saying, hey, a decision's been made, I'm going to go along with that. I think he's saying, I'm going to make an independent decision. I'm now the elected DA. He's also made a point of saying, I don't want there to be this cloud of politics playing a role in this decision, which I appreciate. He's saying, if I'm going to make a decision, I'm going to make a decision that that people can't point to later and say, well, this was all about politics and about an upcoming election. So we'll see. I can't imagine him reversing course, but that's his decision to make.
Yeah. Josh, it's interesting from Amber Am. The new DA, this guy Hochman, ran on being tough on crime. And we know LA is a little out of control at the moment. He's not wanting them out, and neither did Newsom because of politics. Is this going to end up being really, really bad timing for the Menendez brothers after all these years? It's simply a political move where this guy, Nathan Hochman, is going to say, these guys committed the crime. They got to keep doing the time.
I imagine the Menendez brothers would have wished that Gascon had made this decision and brought this hearing months ago.
Yeah.
The fact that this new DA will play a role in that, I'm sure is making them uneasy, because it sounds like all the momentum was in their favor, and now there's this kind of unknown as to what the new DA will do. I mean, I don't know. It puts this new DA in a really tough spot too, because I think had it not been for what Gascon, the previous DA, had done, he probably would have let the habeas play itself out. They brought a habeas petition, allowed the appellate courts to make a decision on that, and then respond to it. But the new DA, or the previous DA, Gascon, kind of interjected himself and saying, I'm going above and beyond that and independent of that, and going to ask them to just be simply resentenced, which now is a mess that kind of lands in the lap of Nathan Hochman, the new DA.
Josh, to what extent did the soft on crime, tough on crime enter into the race between these two?
I think it was the biggest part of the race between the two of them. Gascon came in with this kind of edict of just changing, and he dramatically changed a lot of the way that law enforcement was handled in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is a very liberal area, and a lot of people were in support of the ideas of doing something about overcrowding in prison systems and reevaluating how we treat crime. But then there was this backlash as crime continued to rise, and Hochman came in kind of on riding that wave. And it was not even close. I think it was a close to 30-point win on the part of Hochman. So he definitely came in with a support of a lot of Los Angelinos.
So why do you think that he is going to support the decision of the outgoing DA? That sounds to me as though this is really up in the air.
I agree with you, and I'm not saying I think he is, because I see I'm kind of taking the temperature of people and support for this idea, and I almost wonder if he feels like it might be, again, politically damaging to him as the new DA to go ahead and pull a 180 on a decision that seemed to have support from a lot of people. Not everyone. There's obviously a lot of people who are against this, but I wonder if this is kind of, it's interesting that within the first few weeks of his new administration, he's going to have to make kind of a very political decision with what to do about this case.
Josh, one of the interesting things, and we'll start to wrap up, because Garagos, he warned the media, and the media didn't listen. So he said, no questions if you can respect the families, which apparently they didn't, which is embarrassing to the media. That's a whole other story. And by the way, the reporters were like, they're not real journalists, which means that they were probably YouTubers who get 20 times the numbers that they get. So the knives are out. But by the way, I saw Gladiator 2 last night. I don't think I would have done very well during those times. Joe Patuto, something tells me I would not have survived too long. But I digress. Josh Ritter, one of the first things that Mark Garagos said was it's the first time in many years that Lyle and Erik were in the courtroom, but the reports I have read said that there was a glitch with Zoom, that they were unable to appear, and that Mark actually just whatever a lawyer does to allow the testimony to continue without them there, he did that, but they weren't actually on Zoom. Does that surprise you?
What I had heard is that there was a delay. So while we were sitting here counting the minutes as to how long this hearing was taking, there was actually a 40-something minute delay while they were trying to get them on video. That failed, so instead they just had them call in. My understanding was they actually were able to listen to the proceedings, but it was only audio for them. Yeah, so it all fell short as far as being able to see their actual faces in court from anyone, even people present in court. But end of the day, nothing of any kind of consequence was decided. You know, they're going to hear that the big hearing on this will be in January. Now, the interesting question is, will they actually get an order to transport them from San Diego to Los Angeles to be in court and present for what could be a very consequential hearing for them?
That would be one of the bigger media circuses if they're here in court for that we've seen in a long time. But that's interesting for sure. By the way, coming up at 5:00 Eastern time, there's a woman from Maui named Hana Kobayashi. She went missing in LA on her way to New York, simply vanished. It's a what happened, who done it, what happened, and then in a really tragic twist, we are hearing it was reported that yesterday her father unalived himself outside of LAX, which is just hard to wrap your head around. Why would he do it? Why would it happen? We're going to be asking some best guests these questions coming up tonight. Huge thanks to Josh Ritter and Joe Patuto. Josh Ritter is the host of Courtroom Confidential. Josh, your final thoughts on what we saw today and what you're expecting now, January 30th and 31st.
Well, it's pretty incredible the amount of interest. We saw that the just mob of people and cameras and microphones just wanting any information on this case on what looked like it was just going to be a status hearing. So certainly, this, if they actually show up to court next time, it will be even, tenfold of that. And I don't see this being delayed again. I mean, 2 months is plenty of time. They know all the arguments. The only thing that will change this, and it could change it dramatically, is if the new DA decides that he's not going to take that same position. And then you're going to hear an actual adversarial hearing at the next court date where both sides will have positions, in contrast to each other. And the interesting thing about this, to get into the weeds a little bit, is that there really isn't much more that the baby can be split on all of this, because it's not a decision between manslaughter and murder. It's now just a decision between murder with or without parole. So there's really not kind of an in-between position Hochman could make, other than to say, I agree or I don't agree.
COE, you might want to put this in the calendar. Melody Farris, 12/5, and also I know Julie Frew will keep you honest, but we got to have January 30th and 31st for this in the calendar. Joe Patuto, cannot thank her enough. University of Nebraska professor emerita who's taught everywhere. Joe Patuto, are you surprised by what we saw today? Same thing. What are you expecting come January 30th and 31st?
I agree with Josh, but I will say what I'm expecting post January 31st. If the Menendez brothers succeed, there will be a increase of habeas petitions from prisoners who think that their trials look somewhat like the Menendez brothers, and they could have made the same sort of claim. And there will be petitions raised by people whose trials don't look anything like this. So there will be, that's my prediction, and that's the one that I think of all predictions I make, that one I think I'd put a lot of money on.
There you go. You got two of the best guests. Josh Ritter, it's been solidified. Ned Smith is organizing. You are Mr. February. It's coming right up. We'll be sending still cameras to your home.
I like it.
Yeah.
Gives me time to get in shape before then.
Yeah.
Is it bathing suits in this camp?
You're gonna have to ask. I think that you're only allowed legal documents to cover you. That's it.
God.
But
luckily, legal documents are what, 8.5 by 12 or 14, so you're safe.
It's all up to Ned Smith. She's in charge of the calendar. I have nothing to do with it. We're gonna be back at 5 Eastern again. Hannah Kobayashi, a crazy, sad, and mysterious story that we're gonna be covering at 5 o'clock Eastern. Until then, love you, America. Love you, Jersey, Joe Patuto. Love you, LA. And we're gonna see what's next for the Menendez brothers. And we'll have these guests back on. Have a great day. We'll see you soon in about an hour and a half, everybody.